Yeah.
The interview I did with Axl was completely straight up. I mean, he rang me. He asked me to go to his place. It was the early hours of the morning. I recorded everything. I still have the cassettes. There was a witness. We did 3 different interviews that night. One for the radio show I was doing, and other bits and pieces, and it was all good. But the surrounding. And then when he blew up about the interview, that was really the kind of excuse to deal with me. What had really been going on was I was beyond caring, and I just couldn't get my act together. So I remember there was a group called Little Angels, British group. They came like a mini Def Leppard, and they came to LA, and I spent the day with them, a couple of days with them. I interviewed them. I wrote a great story for Kerrang. The only thing I didn't do was the show they did in LA. I didn't go to it because I went out for dinner with David Coverdale instead, which at the time seemed much more fun to me than going to some group I didn't really feel were going to make it. Lovely people. I thought, well, they've had me for 2 days. I'm writing the fucking story. Why do I need to go and bang my head at the gig, when I could be going out for dinner with David? So there were things like that, and it rubbed people wrong because they weren't in that space. By then, Kerrang had more people on the staff, people that hadn't been there in the dancing on the desks and drinking 12 bottles of champagne days. They hadn't been there for any of that. Computers had come in, and it was a different. EMAP had bought the magazine. It was a very different transition, and I just wasn't in that realm. I was in LA by then. I was writing for tons of different magazines. I was doing TV and radio and all this business, and I from their point of view, I'd grown too big for my boots. And from my point of view, they were all little people that didn't understand, So there you go. So that was.
So on the clash with Axl, Mick. I mean, obviously,
I knew you'd get me back to that.
Of course. I mean, I couldn't let you get off the hook that easily. Of course, what you're referring to there is that famous interview you did for Kerrang in the early '90s. In which Rose threatened to harm Vince Neil of Motley Crue, of course, after an incident.
The actual words were, I want to smash his plastic face.
Yep.
Guns or knives, motherfucker. I don't care whichever way you want to go.
Yeah. And then Vince Neil caught wind of this, came out in the press and said, I'll meet you, I'll fight you anywhere, anytime. And from what I understand, Axl basically never fronted up and claimed that his crew held him back when an opportunity arose backstage at an event to fight Vince Neil. But
well, you've nearly got it right. Let me prove this one out, okay? It sparked from the American Music Awards ceremony where Axl got up and sang with Tom Petty. And Motley Crue were also there getting some award, and Izzy was there. And what had happened was Izzy had been fucking Vince Neil's. Was she his wife? I don't know if she was his wife at that point.
Was it Charisse?
Charisse, the mud wrestler from the Tropicana.
Good mud wrestler.
The best mud wrestler from Tropicana, and classy act. And so Vince had run over, and Vince, this is a tough Mexican street kid in LA, from East LA. Exactly the kind of dude you do not want to get into a fight with unless you also happen to be a tough Mexican kid from the barrio or you're carrying a gun. So Vince runs over, wallops Izzy, and Axl, runs over to help his best bud in all the world. And the bodyguards intervened. Now, Axl, in Izzy's own words to me, was just a little guy. I mean, he had a big brain and a big voice and a big attitude. But I mean, this is not a fighter. You know, you could, I mean, tiny, skinny, hunched up little Quasimodo, you know, in red hair. This is a guy, one punch, he's going to run away crying. Not Vince. So Axl's being held back, you know, and then he reads about it in Kerrang, and whatever the report was in Kerrang, it didn't get it quite right. So he rings me up about midnight one night in LA. Get over here, I got something I want to say, yada yada yada. And so when I came to transcribe the interview, I could see how heavy it looked on the page. I mean, these days, you know, post social media where haters are abundant and we all slag each other off, that didn't exist. You know, to have someone in a magazine offering to meet someone and beat the shit out of them, you know, this was a big story. I mean, the national newspapers picked it up here in the UK. The Sun took my interview and ran it as a 3-day world exclusive, for which I sued them. It took a year, but I got money out of them. I wouldn't repeat the process. It was a complete bad move in terms of time and effort in all the wrong places. But it was a big interview. And as I'm typing this thing up, I'm going to smash that fucker's face, you know, blah, blah, blah. I thought, this looks really heavy. So I rang him and I recorded this conversation as well. And I still have this conversation. And I just said, look, I'm sitting here writing this and it just looks really heavy. He said, well, read me some. And so I read him some of the worst parts. And he was laughing. And then he said, and I quote, he said, I stand by every motherfucking word. Print it. So we did. And 3 days after the magazine came out, his publicist called me and told me Axl didn't believe he'd said those things. And it turned into, you can imagine how I took this information. It had just been a few months before that you know, they'd been asking me if I would have Slash stay at my home in England so he could come off heroin. I was going to introduce him to the private doctor that I knew had helped many people. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't available at that moment in America. It would have meant going into a big rehab treatment center and spending a load of money, whereas this was much more discreet, a private doctor in London, you know. There were all kinds of things I never wrote about. There were all kinds of things I still have never written about and won't, because they were very personal and many things. And so to be that guy, and they were giving me gold records. I've got GNR Lies on the wall next to me here right now with my name on it. To go from that guy to being he didn't say those things, you made it up. I mean, I lost my fucking mind. I then offered to fight him. And of course that didn't pan out.
Didn't Don King want to promote a fight between Axl and Vince, and Alice Cooper came out and said he'd fight the winner?
Yeah, Don King was my big boxing promoter from Ali to Tyson and onwards.
Yeah,
he offered to promote the fight, and Vince was up for it, but not Axl. I mean, fuck's sake, never in a million years. This is the Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah. Well, they probably missed out on a big payday. I mean, nowadays you've got YouTube stars like Logan Paul fighting Floyd Mayweather for millions of dollars.
No, listen, absolutely. But those guys can fight.
Yeah.
You have to remember, Vince could fight. I mean, he could fucking fight. I don't think Axl ever had a fight in his life. He was the guy that would run away, So that was just never, ever going to happen. But of course it blew up. It turned into this thing. And then his publicist did a very shitty thing, really, because she fell out with me because she was crazy about me and I didn't feel the same way. So that went south. Mm-hmm. And she told Kerrang, she said, because they were like, they were desperately trying to get more interviews. And Axl wouldn't. At this point, this is where Axl introduces the contracts. This was a big thing when Use Your Illusion came out. Everybody, if you wanted to interview Axl